Mystery Quilters, happy January and happy New Year. A lot of you have already been in, but this is the picture of the final quilt of what it's going to look like if you have the kit. If you don't have the kit, yours is going to look slightly different, but that's the idea of the final product, okay? This video today is not going to get you all the way to constructing the whole quilt. We are going to talk about how to get this far. And remember, I did mine scrappy. I did mine with fabric I had left over from another quilt. So mine looks different, but you are going to get all the way through cutting your Courthouse steps blocks in half on the diagonal and getting your quilt to be this far. Next month, we'll talk about the final finishing with the Greek keys. I know a lot of you are finishing up the Greek keys. Take your time, get them right, and you'll have plenty of time, I think, by the end of this month to finish that up. The other assignment I have for you this month that's important is to start thinking about what you're going to do with the final quilt. I want my quilt to end up on my bed. So I actually, after this month, am going to change the size of it a little bit. It's supposed to finish 88 inches by 88 inches, an 88-inch square. If you intend to use it on a bed, you may prefer to make it more rectangular. And the next video is going to address how to do that. We can't change the size of it until we get past the Courthouse steps. And I think you'll see while we're constructing it today why that is. The first thing you are going to do is pull out all 9 of the blocks you made from the beginning of the year through October, the first 9 months. You should have been squaring up as you went, and the goal was to have a 12.5-inch square. If your blocks don't measure exactly that, and I've had a lot of phone calls from a lot of you where you're saying either your Courthouse steps didn't measure right or your blocks weren't coming out exactly perfect, that's okay. I've been telling you it's okay. This is the month where we figure out how to fix all of those issues. So the first thing you do is pull out all your blocks. If you have a 12.5-inch square, that makes this easier. If you don't, it doesn't matter. Get out your cutting mat and lay them on your cutting mat and see how big they measure. So you're going to lay your block on, you're going to lay it on there, and if it measures 12.5-inch square and they all measure 12.5-inch square, you get to not listen to me for the next couple of minutes. If they don't, if your blocks are too big or too small, or if you have one block that's too big or too small, then we have to do some changing. What you have to do is figure out what your smallest block is, and you have to make all your blocks the same size. So mine actually had one block that was 12.25 inches instead of 12.5. So I trimmed all my blocks down. The trick is to make sure you don't cut off points. If you have one block where you're going to have to do it, you have one block where you're going to have to do it. And I do, but I'm not telling you which block it is. But what I did, because I only needed to shave off a quarter of an inch, was I went around and I laid my ruler so that my 1/4-inch mark was on all the important points on my block. So on this one, I laid it here and I laid it straight and I trimmed off whatever was beyond the ruler, because what I had, these are sewn together already. So I had my seam allowance hanging over and I just trimmed them all up. And when I did that and I made them all nice and square, because I only needed to shave off a little bit, everything was fine. If you need to shave off more than a 1/4 inch and you're nervous and you're having trouble, call us, come in, and we'll help you figure it all out. Squaring up can be a little bit intimidating. You don't need to be intimidated by it. What you want is all your blocks to finish the same size. Ideally, they will also have 90-degree angles at the corners, but again, if you're having a lot of trouble, call or come in. Once you do that, you're gonna sew your blocks together. Now, this is set on point, which means after we sewed it into a square, so all we did was sew this together like a regular 9-patch. I sewed this row together, and this row together, and then I sewed all 3 rows together. Once you do that, the way it goes into the quilt is on point, which I think is always lends a little bit of drama to your quilt. It takes what you've been looking at for the last year and gives you a new perspective. So we turn it into a diamond. After you do that, you're gonna sew, the pattern has you sew 3 borders, okay, around your quilt. There's 2 skinny borders and then a wider border. Those of you who said to me, my courthouse steps did not measure right, they were small. This is where we fix it. This part is a lot of math, and I'm going to talk you through it, and then I'm going to get out the whiteboard and show it to you again. So here's what you have to do. The first thing you have to do is cut your courthouse steps, and after I talk through the math, then I will talk to you about cutting the courthouse steps, okay? Because it's not hard, but it's going to feel really scary because you spent all that time putting them together, and now you got to cut them up. But once your courthouse steps are cut in half, and I sewed 1 border on. This border, I think you cut it 1 1/4 inches. It finishes at 3/4 of an inch. Then here's what you do. You get out a tape measure, and you're gonna measure how big from this corner to this corner is my courthouse steps block, all right? And then you're gonna measure how big is my 9 patch. And then we're going to use those measurements to find how big these extra borders need to be. My courthouse steps block was slightly small. I've known for months that I'm not going to put all 3 borders into this quilt, okay? If you don't like the look of it, you can also leave those borders out. But mine were a little bit small. So I sewed my first border on. I measured this. Again, my courthouse steps was 40 inches. The first thing the directions tell you is that you're going to need to account for your seam allowance, and that includes on the courthouse steps. So your courthouse steps are supposed to hang over by 1/4 inch on each end. So what I need is this square to be 39.5 inches because I got to subtract those seam allowances. This block measures 37 inches, okay? So this measures 37, and this, it needs to be 39.5 to match up with the courthouse steps. When we add borders, we add them all the way around. So they're gonna make your border, they're gonna make your square wider at each side. So you think, okay, this is 37, this is 39.5, I need to add 2.5 inches. Don't go cut yourself 2.5 inch borders. Your 9 patch will be too big. You need to say, I need 2.5 inches, so you have to divide that to be 1 1/4 inches and add that to both sides, okay? So you need this to finish with an additional 1 1/4 inches on both sides, which means you need to cut those pieces 1/2 inch bigger. So I need to cut that final border 1 3/4 inches. Again, phone number and email. Down?
Getting glare.
Oh.
Tip the bottom down. There you go.
Okay. Phone number and email. We are here to help you with the math, okay? So if you get confused and you're having trouble, just call or come in. But here's what we're doing. I brought my markers so I can write down our measurements. Here's what we did. The courthouse steps edge, that was the edge we measured. It was 40 inches, but we need to subtract 1/2 inch. So we need it to be 39. I'm about to write my 5 backwards. I can feel it. See? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So we need the courthouse steps is 39.5 inches. The actual size of my 9 patch square was 37 inches. Okay? So the difference there is 2.5. I'm sorry. Is 2.5 inches. Okay? Now, we're going to take that thing that's underlined in red twice and put it here. 2.5 divided by 2 is 1.25. That's the finished size of the border, okay? Then you're gonna add your seam allowance to it. So 1 3/4 or 1.75. That's how much space you need to add, okay? If this number turns out to be big, if this number turns out to be 3 or 3.5 or big, you probably want to add more than one border, okay? But for me, this number isn't that big. So I'm just gonna add one border instead of two. Basically, what I'm trying to tell you is this quilt pattern, I know a couple of you have commented to me that the quilt pattern has had several errors in it. And I agree with you, there have been along the way several things where the cutting directions were messed up or whatever. But in this way, this quilt pattern is very well constructed. We no longer have to be worried about the fact that some of you, these finished bigger and some of you these finished smaller and some of you this finished small, this finished the right size, but your courthouse steps didn't. At this point, what we're gonna do is use our old friend math. He's not really my friend, but some of you seem to really like him. But we're gonna use our friend math to figure out how to make what we've constructed fit, okay? So we're gonna double check things and we're gonna go forward with the attitude now that once you get past the courthouse steps, then you're gonna turn your quilt into truly your quilt. You are going to make it the size you want, the dimensions you want, so that you can make it work for you. If you wanna make this quilt bigger, we can help you make the quilt bigger. If you wanna make the quilt smaller, you can do that too, okay? This truly at this point is supposed to become your quilt. If you send a picture or bring it in of your quilt this far, if you can get the courthouse steps blocks sewn on, you get your name in the prize bucket. Originally, I had planned for this to be 2 videos. We were gonna get you through just this, and then we were gonna talk about adding on the courthouse steps. This is only 1 video because once we started putting it all together, we found out that this part really depends on how big these are. So there's not gonna be a second video this month. The beginning of February, we're gonna have a video about how to make your quilt the size you want and how to use the Greek keys, okay? In the meantime, if you get going and you get it done, that's fine. If you have questions, and I'm sure that some of you are gonna have questions, just come in, okay? We're here Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4. Call us, email me, whatever you need. But if you get this far by the end of the month and show us somehow, then you get your name in the prize bucket, okay? And you always get your name in the prize bucket if you learned something from the video and made it all the way to the end. All right, we'll see you guys soon. Happy stitching.